Now everyone sees what you are worth.
I ignored him. I had to. If I let his words worm into my confidence now, everything I'd worked for would collapse. Instead, I focused on the conference table, long and polished like a mirror, soon to be filled with executives whose opinions could alter the trajectory of my life. I adjusted my blazer, smoothed down my notes, and steadied my breathing. This was my moment, my chance to rise. And no amount of Marcus's games could take that from me. Or so I thought. The boardroom was a cathedral of power. Long glass windows stretched across one wall, giving a commanding view of the city skyline. Sunlight glinted off the tops of skyscrapers, casting golden reflections onto the polished mahogany table where the executives would soon sit. Everything about the room screamed money, authority, and control. I stood at the front, laptop open, slides queued. My pulse drummed in my ears as I double-checked the charts, breathing carefully so no one could see how fast my heart was racing. This was the kind of meeting where promotions were decided, where futures were rewritten. And mine was hanging in the balance. One by one, the executives filed in. Men and women in tailored suits, crisp ties, and sharp heels. They barely glanced at me as they took their seats, their conversations clipped and casual, as if billions of dollars weren't at stake in their decisions. My throat was dry, but I smiled politely, just as I had practiced. And then Marcus entered. Late, of course. Always late. Because Marcus believed the meeting didn't start until he walked in. He carried a massive mug of coffee, steam curling from the rim, the strong, bitter smell filling the air. His smirk was firmly in place, and for a split second I knew he was planning something. The hum of the corporate office always carried a strange energy on presentation days. It wasn't just the clicking of heels on marble floors or the steady drone of printers spitting out last-minute reports. It was the tension, invisible but thick, that wrapped around the air like static before a storm. Everyone knew that presentations could make or break careers. And today, it was my turn. I had spent months preparing. Every evening after hours, when the rest of the office lights went dark, mine stayed on. I built charts until my eyes blurred, refined graphs until they gleamed, and rehearsed my words in the silence of the conference room after midnight. My friends told me I was obsessed, but I didn't care. This wasn't just another PowerPoint. It was my shot at being more than the reliable assistant manager. This was the presentation that could show the board I was more than a cog in the machine, that I was a strategist, a leader, someone they could trust with the kind of responsibility Marcus, my boss, had hoarded for years. Marcus, the bane of my existence. He was the kind of man who wore arrogance like cologne. Thick, heavy, impossible to ignore. He strutted around the office with his slicked-back hair and tailored suits, barking orders at interns, taking credit for other people's work, and belittling anyone who dared shine too brightly. He was the kind of boss who didn't just dislike competition, he crushed it. And me? I competed. I still remember the way he looked at me that morning as I wheeled the projector into the boardroom. His smirk was lazy, practiced, like a chess player who already knew his opponent's move. He sipped his oversized mug of coffee, leaning against the doorframe like he owned not just the office, but the very air we breathed. "Big day for you, isn't it?" he drawled, his voice laced with fake encouragement. "Try not to choke." I ignored him. I had to. If I let his words worm into my confidence now, everything I'd worked for would collapse. Instead, I focused on the conference table, long and polished like a mirror, soon to be filled with executives whose opinions could alter the trajectory of my life. I adjusted my blazer, smoothed down my notes, and steadied my breathing. This was my moment, my chance to rise. And no amount of Marcus's games could take that from me. Or so I thought. The boardroom was a cathedral of power. Long glass windows stretched across one wall, giving a commanding view of the city skyline. Sunlight glinted off the tops of skyscrapers, casting golden reflections onto the polished mahogany table where the executives would soon sit. Everything about the room screamed money, authority, and control. I stood at the front, laptop open, slides queued. My pulse drummed in my ears as I double-checked the charts, breathing carefully so no one could see how fast my heart was racing. This was the kind of meeting where promotions were decided, where futures were rewritten. And mine was hanging in the balance. One by one, the executives filed in. Men and women in tailored suits, crisp ties, and sharp heels. They barely glanced at me as they took their seats, their conversations clipped and casual, as if billions of dollars weren't at stake in their decisions. My throat was dry, but I smiled politely, just as I had practiced. And then Marcus entered. He made his way around the table slowly, shaking hands, cracking jokes, charming the room with that oily confidence that made people think he was harmless. But I knew better. I knew the look in his eye, the sharp glint that always appeared when he had a knife to twist. Finally, he stopped just behind me. He leaned down, too close, as if to whisper encouragement. His breath reeked of espresso and ego. "Big day for you," he murmured, loud enough for the nearest executives to hear. "Try not to mess it up." And then it happened. The mug tipped. Hot, dark coffee cascaded over my stack of printed notes, soaking pages, bleeding ink into meaningless swirls. The liquid spread across the polished table, pooling into my neatly prepared handouts, dripping onto the floor. I gasped, jerking back as the heat brushed my skin. Around the table, executives shifted in their seats, startled. A few whispered. One even chuckled awkwardly, the way people do when they're not sure if they've just witnessed an accident or something deliberate. "Oh no!" Marcus exclaimed theatrically, clutching the now half-empty mug. "I'm so sorry, such a clumsy mistake." His tone was light, but his eyes were sharp, triumphant. He glanced at me just long enough for me to catch it. The smirk. The silent checkmate. For a moment, I froze. My mind raced with options: scream at him, accuse him, crumble in humiliation. Every instinct screamed to react, to let him see he had destroyed me. But I didn't. I inhaled deeply, smoothed my blazer, and forced a calm smile. "Accidents happen," I said evenly. With steady hands, I reached into my folder and pulled out a small silver flash drive. My real presentation, my backup, had been safe the whole time. As I plugged it into the projector, the screen lit up with my slides. Crisp, flawless, untouched. The executives leaned forward, suddenly more interested than before. Marcus froze. For the first time, his smirk faltered. I straightened my shoulders, met the eyes of the boardroom, and began. "Good morning. Let's begin." Inside, my fury simmered, hot and sharp. Marcus thought spilling coffee would end me. What he didn't know was that this was only the beginning of his downfall. The room had fallen silent after the spill, as though everyone was waiting for me to crack. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, some curious, some pitying, some just amused at the office drama unfolding. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his oversized mug now empty, his smirk practically carved into his face. He thought it was over before it began. But what Marcus didn't know was that I had been preparing for him just as much as I'd been preparing for the board. "Accidents happen," I repeated, my voice even, though my hands itched to shake. I slid the flash drive into the laptop, clicked twice, and there it was. My work, alive and glowing across the projector screen in bold colors and crisp graphs. I saw the executives exchange glances. Some even nodded, impressed with my composure. And in that moment, I realized something important. Marcus hadn't ruined me. He had given me the perfect stage to show them who I really was. "Good morning, everyone," I began, my voice steady now, clear and sharp. "Thank you for your time. Let me walk you through a vision of where our company could be in 5 years. As I spoke, the room transformed. I walked them through trends, strategies, and growth models. I layered in stories of success, framed every risk with solutions, and made every chart tell a story. The slides weren't just numbers. They were proof of foresight, of leadership, of a mind that could see farther than the next quarterly report. But I didn't stop there. Hidden in my presentation, woven carefully like threads of silk, were subtle references to inefficiencies. Notes about misallocated resources. Mentions of projects that mysteriously went over budget. I never accused anyone. I never said a name. But every sentence was a breadcrumb, leading the executives toward one inevitable conclusion. Someone in the current system was failing them. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Marcus shift in his seat. His smirk was gone, replaced by a faint twitch at the corner of his mouth. He was realizing, slowly, painfully, that the trap he thought he had set for me was closing around him instead. I maintained a calm and professional tone. I didn't let my eyes linger on him once. To the board, it probably seemed like I was simply doing my job. But Marcus knew. He could hear the unspoken accusation in every oversight, every missed opportunity, every avoidable loss. By the time I finished, the silence in the room wasn't uncertain anymore. It was a calculation. The kind of silence that meant seeds had been planted, doubts had been sown, and trust had begun to shift. "Thank you," I said, clicking off the projector. "I'm happy to take your questions." The executives leaned forward. Their eyes weren't on Marcus anymore. They were on me. And in that moment I knew the coffee wasn't the end of my story. It was the spark. The days after the presentation were strangely quiet. In most offices, that silence would mean indifference, but in ours, silence was never empty. It was heavy, watchful, and dangerous. I noticed the shift immediately. Executives who had once ignored me in the hallway now stopped to ask questions. A few even lingered by my desk with polite smiles that felt pointed. My inbox was filled with short, curious follow-ups about the observations I had made during my presentation. Observations. That was the word they used, but I knew what they really meant. The cracks I'd carefully exposed in Marcus's kingdom. The first Betrayal opening came 2 days later. I was in the break room reheating last night's leftovers when Dana, one of the senior VPs, walked in. Dana wasn't someone you crossed lightly. She was sharp, calculating, and had a reputation for sniffing out weakness. For years, I'd watched Marcus fawn over her approval while she barely acknowledged his existence. Now, she stood beside me, stirring sugar into her tea. "That was an impressive presentation," she said casually, not looking at me. "Thank you," I replied, trying to sound neutral. "And those inefficiencies you mentioned," she added, her eyes finally meeting mine. "Were those hypothetical?" Her gaze was sharp enough to cut glass. I chose my next words carefully. "Nothing I said was hypothetical," I murmured. "But not everything I know fits into a 20-minute pitch." Dana's eyes narrowed. Then slowly, she smiled. "Interesting." She left without another word, but I knew then. I had her attention. From that moment, doors started opening. Coffee invitations, lunch meetings, late-night emails from executives who suddenly valued my perspective. One by one, I fed them pieces of the puzzle Marcus had so carelessly left lying around, discrepancies in expense reports, project budgets that ballooned without explanation, vendor contracts that mysteriously cost double what they should. I wasn't reckless. I didn't dump everything at once. No, I dripped it out slowly, carefully, like a doctor prescribing medicine in precise doses. Just enough to build trust, just enough to make them realize that I saw what Marcus hoped they never would. And while I played strategist in the shadows, Marcus strutted through the office as if nothing had changed. He still barked orders, still leaned against my desk with his smug grin, still called me kiddo in front of others. He had no idea that while he sipped his morning coffee, I was sharpening the knife that would cut him down. The whispers grew louder. Executives began asking questions in meetings, probing Marcus's answers, challenging his explanations. He grew defensive, irritated. I watched the cracks spread across his mask, and I savored every moment. The coffee he spilled had stained my notes, but now I was staining his reputation. And unlike ink on paper, reputations don't wash out. It began subtly, almost invisibly. At first, you wouldn't even notice the shift unless you were paying close attention. But I noticed. The executives started asking Marcus for things they had never cared about before: detailed reports, original invoices, breakdowns of budgets he had once gotten away with explaining in a single sentence. They wanted receipts. They wanted numbers. They wanted proof. And Marcus was slipping. I saw it in the way his hand twitched when they interrupted him mid-pitch. I heard it in his voice when he grew defensive over questions that seemed harmless on the surface. For the first time in years, Marcus didn't look like the man in control. He looked like a man being hunted. Of course, he didn't know yet that the hunter was me. One morning, he stormed into my office without knocking, slamming a folder onto my desk so hard that my coffee cup rattled. His tie was crooked, his hair messier than usual, his smirk absent. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded. I blinked at him, feigning innocence. "Excuse me? Don't play dumb," he snapped. "You've been whispering to them. I can feel it. Every damn question they throw at me has your fingerprints all over it." Inside, I almost smiled. The fact that Marcus was rattled enough to confront me meant my plan was working. But outwardly, I just tilted my head, calm, collected. "I don't control what the executives ask," I said smoothly. "Maybe they just want answers." He glared at me for a long moment, his chest rising and falling in quick, angry breaths. Finally, he leaned closer, his voice low and venomous. "You're playing with fire. And when it burns you, don't expect me to save you." With that, he snatched up the folder and stormed out. The door slammed so hard the glass in the frame trembled. But what Marcus didn't realize was that the fire he spoke of was already consuming him. Behind the scenes, Dana and a few other executives had quietly launched an internal audit. They pulled records from the last 3 years, every contract, every vendor deal, every budget Marcus had manipulated. And the deeper they dug, the more rot they uncovered. I didn't even have to push anymore. All I did was sit back, sip my coffee, and watch the seeds I had planted grow into a forest of suspicion. At night, I stayed late under the guise of catching up on work. In reality, I fed the investigation with carefully timed drops of information, overlooked emails, discrepancies I had flagged months ago that Marcus had buried, spreadsheets that didn't add up. I left trails where they needed trails, and silence where silence was more damning. Meanwhile, Marcus unraveled. His voice carried down hallways in angry bursts. He snapped at interns, berated managers, and barked at his assistants so loudly one afternoon that half the floor went silent listening. His coffee intake doubled, then tripled. His once pristine suits now bore wrinkles, his eyes ringed with sleepless exhaustion. The man who had strutted into the boardroom, coffee in hand, ready to humiliate me, was gone. What remained was a paranoid shadow, fighting battles he couldn't win. And the best part? He still didn't know how the game had truly started. The summons came on a Thursday afternoon. A calendar invite, no explanation, subject line only. Department review? Mandatory. I knew what it meant. The boardroom was colder that day, as if even the air conditioning knew a storm was brewing. Executives filled the long mahogany table, their usual small talk replaced by stiff silence. Papers shuffled. Pens clicked. No one smiled. Marcus walked in last, as always. But this time he wasn't smirking. He had tried. I could see the faint curl at the edge of his lips, the way he forced his chin high, but the mask was cracking. Sweat glistened on his brow despite the chill. His suit, once flawlessly pressed, looked just a little too tight around his shoulders. He sat at the head of the table, cleared his throat, and waited. Normally, he commanded the room with arrogance. Today, the room waited for someone else. The director, a sharp-eyed man named Collins, adjusted his glasses and spoke first. "This meeting is to address discrepancies. Financial discrepancies within this department." The words landed like a stone in water. Marcus flinched, then leaned forward, voice too eager. "Discrepancies? I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. If someone's been careless, I'll deal with it." His eyes flicked toward me, a flash of venom hidden behind his practiced charm. But Collins wasn't swayed. "We've conducted a thorough audit. Contracts, budgets, expense reports. And what we've found is troubling." He slid a thick folder across the table. Marcus opened it with shaking hands. Page after page of evidence stared back at him, inflated vendor invoices, duplicate expenses, business trips that looked suspiciously like vacations. The room was silent except for the turning of pages and Marcus's shallow breaths. Finally, he looked up, desperate. "This isn't what it looks like," he said quickly. "Numbers can be misleading, and—" "Enough," Dana cut in, her voice icy and precise. "Don't insult us, Marcus. The numbers don't lie, and neither do the patterns." Marcus's mask crumbled. His voice cracked as he scrambled for excuses, blaming assistants, blaming accounting software, even hinting that I had manipulated reports out of spite. That was my moment. I didn't need to say a word, not yet. I just sat there, calm, collected, watching him dig his own grave. The more he spoke, the more the executive's expressions hardened. He wasn't convincing them. He was condemning himself. Finally, Collins looked down the table at me. "Thanks to her diligence," he said, "we caught this in time." All eyes turned toward me. My heart pounded, but I held their gaze.
Calm.
Professional. Silent confirmation of what they already knew. The truth had been sitting here all along, waiting to be uncovered. Marcus slammed the folder shut. "This is a setup. You're all making a huge mistake." His voice rose, echoing off the glass walls. Security guards appeared at the door, drawn by the shouting. In that moment, Marcus wasn't a powerful boss anymore. He was a desperate man, cornered, stripped bare in front of the very people he had spent years trying to impress. "Please escort Mr. Grant out," Collins said firmly. The guard stepped forward. Marcus's face twisted with rage as he stood, pointing at me with a trembling finger. "You," he spat. "This is your fault. You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming." But his words carried no weight anymore. His power had evaporated. All that remained was bitterness. As the doors closed behind him, the room exhaled. The silence was heavy, final. I sat still, hands folded neatly on the table, a calm smile flickering across my lips. Marcus had thought spilling coffee on me would end my career. Instead, it had ended his. The day I walked into his office, it didn't feel real at first. The room was exactly as I remembered. The broad oak desk, the leather chair turned slightly toward the window, the framed certificates lining the wall. But Marcus wasn't there anymore.
No smagues, Mirk.
No steaming coffee cup perched carelessly on the edge of my documents. No voice dripping with sarcasm, telling me I wasn't ready for leadership. It was mine now. The keycard still felt warm in my hand as I stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing off the hallway chatter. For a long moment, I just stood there, taking it in. I remembered the first time Marcus had summoned me into this office. I'd been a junior analyst then, nervous, clutching my notebook like a shield. He hadn't looked up when I entered. He'd just waved a dismissive hand toward the chair, as though I were an inconvenience rather than a person.
"Seat."
"Don't talk until I ask you something," he'd said. That was Marcus's way, control through humiliation. I remembered sitting there, shrinking under his gaze, nodding at every barb, telling myself that if I worked harder, maybe one day I'd earn his respect. But respect from men like Marcus isn't earned. It's weaponized. I walked slowly toward the desk now, my heels clicking against the polished floor. The chair loomed before me, larger than life. I reached out and ran my hand along the armrest, the leather smooth beneath my fingers. For years, I'd seen him lean back in this chair while belittling others, while drinking his coffee, while plotting his next move. Now it was mine. I sat down. The chair creaked, adjusting to my weight. I leaned back, mimicking the very posture he used to adopt. Only this time, the power wasn't a performance. It was real. On the desk, a single folder waited. My name is embossed on the front. My promotion letter. Director of Operations. I smiled. Outside the glass walls, employees walked by, stealing glances into the office. Their expressions told me everything. Curiosity, respect, even pride. Some gave subtle nods, as if silently acknowledging that balance had been restored. And in that moment, I realized the sweetest part of revenge wasn't Marcus's downfall. It wasn't even the promotion. It was the power shift. The knowledge that the very office he had once used to dominate others was now a symbol of his irrelevance. I opened the blinds wider, letting the sunlight pour in. No more shadows, No more whispered threats. This space would be different under my reign. Transparent. Just. Powerful. On the bookshelf, a framed photo of Marcus still sat, a relic someone had forgotten to remove. I picked it up, studied his frozen smile, then set it face down in a drawer. Out of sight. Out of power. Out of history. Leaning back, I clasped my hands and looked out at the city's skyline. The empire Marcus thought he owned was mine now. And every time I sat in this chair, every time I signed a contract or led a meeting, I would remember the day he spilled coffee on me, thinking it was the end. He thought he was untouchable. He thought I was disposable. But queens don't crumble when they're tested.
They rise.
They claim the throne. And I had claimed mine.